So I read this article I'm going to put in the description, and it's about a man named John Geer who was shot a year and a half ago in his home in Virginia, in Fairfax, Virginia. And what really concerns me about the story is that it is a year and a half ago that this happened. And the reason the story is relevant now is because new information has come out about this case. But I shouldn't be hearing about this now. I should have heard about this a long time ago. This should have been very relevant during the Ferguson issue. This should have been relevant during the chokehold issue in New York, I believe it was. And here's why. John Geer, 46-year-old man, was in his home, and he was having a dispute with his wife. She was breaking up with him and moving out, and she called the police to say that he was throwing her possessions onto the lawn. And somehow through the conversation on the phone with 911, there was the impression that they needed to come in with, guns blazing, so to speak. So they arrive. 2 squad cars with 4 officers, and then later on a police negotiator also arrives. And these men manage to get Geer out of the house, and he has his hands up. There's a picture of him in the article. Terrible quality picture, but you can still see him. With his hands up, standing out on his front porch. And there are officers who have their guns trained in his direction. And I'm not really sure what they're negotiating about. I don't really know why it's necessary to have this long negotiation. But he was trying to be cooperative. He was doing everything very slowly, trying not to make the cops fearful. He didn't want to get shot. He said, I know I can get shot. I know if I reach down or drop my hands, I can get shot. And Geer pointed to one nearby officer in particular. I'm reading directly from the article right now. Adam Torres, who kept raising his pistol to aim at Geer's chest over and over and over again. This was repeated, and he asked, I'm no longer reading the article, this is me talking now, and he kept raising it over and over again, and then Geer was very scared. He asked the negotiator, okay, well, here's what I would like. I'm feeling very nervous. I feel like I'm going to get shot by this man, and I don't know why. Can he please move back? I am fearing for my life right now. Just this specific man in particular. And then at one point, his fears were in fact correct. Adam Torres shot John Geer in the chest, killing him. And then immediately, Geer didn't die immediately. He retreated back into the house, and I guess he bled out. I'm not sure. And Torres, after the shot, turned to the negotiator and started talking to him. He acknowledged it. I'm reading from the article again. He acknowledged it had been him and began muttering about how he was sorry and his wrist was hurting. He told Barnes about how he had a fight over the phone with his wife just before arriving on the scene. His wrist was hurting. Now, for anyone who has ever used a firearm, I cannot think of any reason why you would believe that someone fired accidentally by their wrist hurting. There's nothing to do with the mechanisms involved with firing a weapon. There's no reason. And you shouldn't have fired accidentally. There's no excuse for it, because you should have had the trigger discipline to know that you don't put your finger on the trigger until you plan on shooting something or someone. And if you do put your finger on the trigger, you must be justified in killing whatever it is you were shooting at, if it is alive. Very standard gun safety. Don't put your finger on the trigger unless you are about to shoot immediately, within a second. And they don't have hair triggers. In New York, the trigger pull required, in pounds, is actually higher than what normally comes out of the factory. They actually get them designed so that you will not accidentally discharge. This wasn't in New York, but I'm just giving you an example. Police are trained, or they should be, they're supposed to be trained, that we have this trigger is difficult to pull for a reason. It is so you don't accidentally shoot anyone. Now, the unfortunate part of that for Torres is that he now has no excuse, if we're being honest with ourselves. But because he's a cop, of course it goes to internal review and things like that. And so the reason that this article is interesting is because it happened a year and a half ago, and no one's talked about it. And I'd say it's because he was white, and because the officers were largely white. I don't know what race Torres was, but there was no suspected racial issue there. The frustrating thing is that because this doesn't contain the racial issue on top of the police issue, it's not as interesting to people. So, why should this have been relevant to the Ferguson discussion? Well, here's my answer. When we put labels on people, most of us understand that you have to use accurate labels. They have to be true. And I think a lot of us try to make sure that we do use accurate labels when we describe someone. If we call someone a racist, we actually look into it and we try to figure out if they're racist or not. We don't just slap it on there and say, oh, well, it's because I said so, or he just seems like a racist. He looks like one. Most of us try to do that. But in that analysis of that label, oftentimes we forget about other elements of these people. We forget about the other labels that we need to be putting on top of them as well. And that's a problem. Because in this case, the racist labels that we were analyzing for Darren Wilson and for the we'll just call them the chokehold cops, Eric Garner, I believe, is the man who's killed. I can't remember the name. The label that we used looking at these was racism. And that's a problem because these men, while they may have been racist, I don't know. I didn't go into that. That wasn't important to me. What was important to me is the other label that goes on these men. Because if they were racists and just racists, these incidents wouldn't have happened. You don't find roving bands of 5 white racists on the street in New York City who will put a man in a chokehold in broad daylight until he dies. It doesn't happen. But you can find a group of 5 cops who are willing to put a man in a chokehold until he dies, even when he uses the last of the air that he has to desperately call out, "I can't breathe," over and over and over again. If these men were racists, no one would have been attacking Eric Garner, or whatever his name was. We'll call him Eric Garner. No one would have been attacking Eric Garner if these men were just racists. You also have the right to fight back if you were attacked by a group of 5 racists, and you'd be encouraged to do so. If a group of 5 random white men had just attacked Eric Garner in the street, he would have been well within his rights to do whatever he had to get out of the situation. It would have been self-defense. But there is no self-defense legally against cops in that same way. It doesn't work the same way. And I'm not sure what the boundaries legally are, but I can tell you that no one knows that. No one knows off the top of their head, in a panic situation, when you're lying on the ground on your face dying, what your legal rights are. That's why we require the reading of Miranda rights, because people don't know what their rights are in that situation. They don't just know them off the top of their head. They're not legally educated, and they're panicking because they're dying, or they think they're being taken to prison, or whatever the issue is. They have no idea if they have the right to self-defense against a cop. And I'm assuming that they don't, at least in the same way. In fact, I'm sure that they don't have the ability to self-defense in the same way. Regardless of what the letter of the law says, the interpretation is going to end up that they assaulted the cop, most likely. So there's that. You don't find bands of racists, and if you did, you could fight back against them. And of course, thirdly, if you lost and you were still killed, then those men would go to trial for murder. And they would probably go to jail. But because these men are policemen first, not racists, they have immunity to the legal system. I don't know if these men were racist or not, but what's most important in this situation is that they can attack people with legal impunity. There is no consequence for doing so, and they know it. Racism is much more dangerous when you pair it with an ability to kill people. And that's why it's more important that these men are cops than racists. And so next time there's an issue like this, don't make it about whether or not the cop was a racist. Make it about how the cop acted as a cop. This should be about police. This should be about the choices the police are making as policemen. Racism should be second. Now, I know it seems like that's easy for me to say as a white person, and sure, I'd agree with you, it is easy for me to say as a white person. You're absolutely right. But racism is not dangerous just as a cultural issue. People don't die when you call someone a nigger. It's horrible, and it's rude, and it causes cultural issues. But if you can't legally kill someone because you're both a racist and a cop, then it's not as much of an issue. Life comes first. We have to stop allowing our cops to do this. It's got to stop.